Welcome to the Leo Zagami Show and this new format, meaning 20 years of Illuminati confessions and the relative news. A long time ago, in 2006, I started my Illuminati confessions online. For this 20-year anniversary, we have decided to change the format of my show to focus, of course, on the contents that come from my books, as well, of course, as explaining what is happening in relation to this new world order of sorts. And today we have definitely an important episode. Let me pick up here I have to absolutely get my glasses after 20 years. I need those. Okay, first of all, let's thank the sponsors who make this broadcast possible. Dennis Bolanos Enrique, Daniel Estes, Margo Rosata Minta. For the sponsors, we usually have our vintage applause, which I find the right choice. It's not too high tech; it's vintage, but the applause, it's still an applause. If you want to become a sponsor of our show, you can do it. You can do it, of course, also anonymously if you want. Thanks to the sponsors and to the readers of my books, we managed to carry on this important broadcast. Dennis Bolanos Enrique, Daniel Estes, and Margo Rosada Minta are today's sponsors. You can join them by donating on GoFundMe or donating through Cash App. You can find the Cash App handle also with my latest articles on leozagami.com. And we all know what you have on that $1 bill that characterizes, that phrase, New Order of the Ages, that Novus Ordo Secularum, which means a new American era, because it's the start of the American era, a new epoch for humanity, let's say. And now we are seeing the world order taking a new step. We had the New World Order after the Second World War. That the New World Order was characterized by America, of course, as the driving force. But also during the Cold War, we had this confrontation of words, fortunately, with Russia, the Soviet Union, which was also very important because they became the main antagonists. You always have to have an antagonist. No? So the world was divided into pro-America or pro-Russia, pro-Soviet Union. We all know what happened to the Soviet Union. And since then, we have the emerging factor of the Chinese. Now, an important book, which, of course, is entitled The Whole Truth About the Illuminati and the New World Order, is Volume 1, which I highly recommend, as well as a book by Henry Kissinger, a Sabbatean Frankist, which I have exposed in my latest book on Jeffrey Epstein, which is still my bestseller, A Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster. In this book, we even show the moment in which Henry Kissinger was excommunicated by the Rabbinical Council of Rabbi Marvin S. Antelman. Henry Kissinger was accused of being a Sabbatean Frankist, and he was one of the biggest players of the New World Order. So it's important also maybe to cite his own work. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this new format, which brings you also more insight from my own books, my own publications.
Yes. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Illuminati News.
Free and independent.
Welcome to our show.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for...
Yes, we have the opportunity. Don't worry, Bush. We have the opportunity, but we are already seeing also this new world order being characterized by free players, and it's a new world order which in a way replicates what we already saw in George Orwell's 1984. For those who don't know George Orwell's work, I have here a summary of his own concept of these supercontinental states that seem to fight with each other in this never-ending confrontation, which of course it's part of the strategy which is outlined in Orwell's 1984, the strategy of pushing always this massive amount of tension in the air, of negativity, and then you have these free super states that seem to also be replicated now in a real world. The only difference, and here I want to go to an article which I published recently on leozagami.com, an article which is entitled The Truth on the New World Order, Trump and the 2026 Birth of the Continental Superstates. Because what has happened recently in Venezuela is only the beginning of a takeover of this hemisphere that will coincide with a takeover from Russia, of Eurasia, and of China for East Asia. So this is an article which, of course, you can go and read if you want to have an even deeper insight. But today in our show, we will try to help you out understanding a lot of these elements. Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. Nowadays, Oceania can't be controlled, at least formally, by Great Britain, because Great Britain is no longer that immense empire which was still powerful at the time George Orwell wrote this book, 1984. Now it's, of course, the United States controlling the area called Oceania. And then you have Eurasia, which was emerged after the Soviet Union in Orwell's book. And that actually seems to be pretty correct, because emerged after the Soviet Union absorbed continental Europe. This is almost prophetic, you would say. And then we have East Asia, formed later, comprising China and neighboring areas. Well, it seems like we need to introduce a little bit better this topic directly from George Orwell's book, because it seems to be the playbook of the upcoming New World Order.
The year is 1984, and the country we know as the UK is under the totalitarian rule of the party, under the ideology of INGSOC, short for English Socialism. Britain has been relegated to the status of a province known as Airstrip 1. The party rules one of the free superstates called Oceania. Unlike in our own world, the name covers much more territory, with the United States having amalgamated with the British Empire in the years following World War II. Oceania then expanded further to encompass South America, Southern Africa, Australia, and the surrounding lands. Airstrip 1 is but one province of this vast empire, and the third most populous. Within Airstrip 1, the plot is set mostly within London, still referred to as such, but a run-down, dirty place, full of antiquated and decaying buildings. Though formerly the capital of an independent UK, London is not the capital of Oceania. Indeed, Oceania has no capital city. Its leader's physical location is never divulged, and the only unifying aspect of the superstate is that English is its lingua franca and Newspeak its official language. This decentralization, in which each province exists as, in theory, equally important, with its leaders drawn from that area, is a deliberate policy to avoid feelings of colonization or alienation, which may contribute towards possible revolt and thus an end to the party's dominion. Yet the party and Oceania do not exist alone. Around the same time Oceania emerged, the superstate of Eurasia also came into being, its permanent borders stretching from Portugal to the Bering Strait, as a result of Russia absorbing mainland Europe and much of Asia after the Second World War. The third and smallest of the three superstates, East Asia, took around another decade to form following this, after years of confused fighting, and settled into its permanent borders containing China, Indochina, the Korean Peninsula, as well as the Japanese home islands. Each superstate, as described in 1984's in-universe book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, is effectively a self-contained universe, each population heavily constrained from contacting the others, and under the dominion of a totalitarian party.
So each supercontinental state is, of course, isolated, compartmentalized in this new world order. Like I explained in my article, before getting to a one world government, we will have this interim, this stage in which these three supercontinental states emerged. And one is the United States, the other one is Russia, and then, of course, China. Somebody is asking me, what will Israel fit in? Now, in regards to George Orwell in 1984, the whole area of the Middle East and part, very big chunk of Africa, is actually in perpetual conflict and is not really ascribed to one or the other zone of influence. It's simply the battlefield. So it's almost like Orwell was presenting to us a Middle East in eternal conflict, a little bit like I've described also in volume 10 of my Confessions. In regards to Henry Kissinger, which used to be the late Henry Kissinger, one of the key players of this new world order, which is now an old world order, because now what is happening is a complete rewriting of this world order, in which Trump, of course, is transforming the modality in which also the rule of law applies at an international level. He said it's only based on his own morality. Well, in reality, we know that Greenland as well as Venezuela are, of course, key components of this new world order and of this continental superstate, which will be Oceania, which will include, of course, the whole of the United States, Central America, South America, and also Canada. Canada is also going to become sooner or later part of this supercontinental state. And at the same time, Maduro's capture might seem a blow to China or Russia, but in reality is already being held as a blueprint for what is going to happen in Taiwan, because to each their own piece of the cake. The New World Order will be basically led by these free forces. These free forces, these free supercontinental states, and we're going to have, of course, Israel having a big role within the influence also that we have here in Oceania. But Canada, like I said, is also going to probably be like Mexico, the next country to be forced to give up gradually their sovereignty. Trump says the US will begin strikes on cartels in Mexico. That is also, of course, part of the plan. Like I said, the New World Order is not really ever, and I explained this in volume 1 of my Confessions, controlled by a specific country. It's rather controlled by an elite, a group of people. We have said this is a pyramid which at the apex, like I showed in volume 12 of my Confessions, there is the eye of the Jesuits, as well as the key role of the Sabbatean Frankists, which I've also outlined in The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster. Imagine that only 1% of Epstein files have been made public. But it seems like the majority of people in the MAGA movement have been busy either fighting each other in this kind of MAGA civil war, or either distracted by these never-ending wars that, of course, were not promised by Donald J. Trump when he was running for president, as he was promising America first. Now we have also Iran, which is, of course, rallying around the son of the former Shah. We have discussed this in the past here at the Leo Zagami show. The Iranians are ready for Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of the last Shah of Persia, of Iran, that will now be able to move into his old position. I have written a couple of articles which I published in June of last year. One is this one, Secret Meaning of Israel Operation Rising Lion, as Trump demands unconditional surrender, and the Grand Lodge of Iran in exile prepares for the return of the Pahlavi dynasty. Then we have also another article, always based on this topic, which I suggest you go and read at riozagami.com, Iranian Freemasonry versus Khamenei, the reincarnation of Zahak and the war between good and evil. Now, that good and evil is not so clear any longer, because in this new world order, there is no ethic and moral superiority from one side or the other. They are all gangsters on top, and they are operating to finalize also the technological control of mankind thanks to the AI and robotics. So that is also a very important element of what is being developed. There is also a character in the book 1984, a character which is based on a Sabbatean Frankist. is called Emanuel Goldstein. And he seems to antagonize the Big Brother character in 1984. By the way, the Big Brother character is nameless because in reality it could well be a artificial creation in the future that could be the cyber Satan taking over and ascribing it maybe a name just for convenience. Emanuel Goldstein. Already Goldstein should, this surname brings us to the Ashkenazi who talks, of course, Yiddish, Eastern Europe, the Sabbatean Frankist, but there is much more. Check this out.
In George Orwell's 1984, the two most famous men in the superstate of Oceania are undoubtedly Big Brother and his arch-rival Emanuel Goldstein. Interestingly, however, there is considerable doubt as to whether either man actually exists. Welcome to 1984 Lore, and today we shall ponder the existence of Emanuel Goldstein, based on what we know from the novel. Emanuel Goldstein, of course, is introduced to the reader in the very first chapter of the story. He is always the principal villain depicted on screen in the daily 2 Minutes Hate, though the theme varies from day to day. Goldstein, according to party history, had been an early leader of the party and almost on a level with Big Brother himself. If we indulge in the party history for a moment, then the approximate date of his disaffection and exile was sometime in the early 1960s. By the middle of that decade, the party had seized power and was in a period of great purges that eventually left Big Brother as the undisputed leader of the party by about 1970. Other leaders and influencers had certainly existed at this time. Winston himself recalls the last three of them, Jones, Aronson and Rutherford, who are covered in their own dedicated video on this channel. Rutherford had been a cartoonist and caricaturist for the party, and even after his own denouncement, arrest and curing in the Ministry of Love, his cartoons still occasionally appeared in the Times. By the time of the fall of these three men around 1965, Goldstein had also fled and was in hiding somewhere. An interesting, if admittedly weak link between these characters is the Chestnut Tree Cafe. The cafe has a dark aura to it in the novel, both as a haunt of broken individuals released by the Thought Police, but also as a former magnet of dissidents and, it is even said, of Goldstein himself. The link may be innocent enough, though it's tempting to see it as a deliberate connection of these men. We know that Jones, Aronson and Rutherford certainly existed and were the last prominent rivals to Big Brother, since we also have Winston's very real recollection of them broken in the cafe, and the shady knowledge Goldstein too sometimes patronised the place. We do have a sliver of connection to a real man. On another point, in contrast to Big Brother, who is nameless and hence arguably even more mysterious than his arch-enemy, Goldstein does have a definite name. Of course, out of universe, the name is almost certainly specifically chosen, given the character is based on Lev Bronstein, better known to history buffs as Leon Trotsky.
And Leon Trotsky was the guy who I also cite here in my latest book, had a key role, of course, in the Russian Revolution, in relation also to a very important bank and also to a very important, two very important families. So this is something that you can discover by reading my book, but I can anticipate at least one thing regarding this bank, which I think has a very important role in the New World Order. It does no longer exist, but it was a very important multinational investment bank. It was founded by Abraham Kuhn and his brother-in-law Solomon Loeb. It became the way the Rockefellers linked to the Sabbatean Frankists and of course the Jacob Schiff, who was Loeb's son-in-law, had a key role, and Jacob Schiff was also
Trotsky has undenied
key figure in financing Trotsky, as well as a key figure in a family which had a long history connected to the Sabbatean Frankists. This is Jacob Schiff. But I repeat, then there is also the link with the Rockefeller family. Why am I starting from here? Because with the Rockefeller family and with this specific bank which I've mentioned and I will discuss now, there is that link to Rockefeller, and the Rockefeller family, of course, is the one, together with this Kuhn Loeb and Co., which worked very much as a principal rival of JP Morgan and Company, and it became a very important bank in the very early stages of the work conducted by another great protagonist of the New World Order, that is Nelson Rockefeller. Now, it's very important for me to show you who Nelson Rockefeller was, but before that, of course, I wanted to explain you a little bit the role that these Sabbatean Frankist bankers had in the development of the Soviet Union, because they were the ones that ended up helping out Trotsky when nobody wanted to help out Trotsky. They were the ones who went there and helped out Trotsky with this revolution that, of course, changed forever the history of Russia.
Orwell's, at least, with Orwell's big baddie in the novel, having himself been a prominent leader of the Bolsheviks in the earlier years of the October Revolution and Soviet Union. Trotsky led the Red Army during the Civil War and was supposedly primed to take over from Vladimir Lenin as the leader of the Soviet Union when the latter died, only for the big brother-like Joseph Stalin to take the reins instead. Trotsky too wrote a book, The Revolution Betrayed, published in 1936, and moved about in exile before settling in Mexico. Unlike Goldstein in 1984, however, Trotsky did not escape the party and was assassinated via ice pick, dying on 21st of August 1940. This seems to be an interpretation heavily favoured in adaptations of the novel too, the Radford film of 1984 for example, depicting the lean Jewish face of Goldstein with the goatee beard described, which of course resembles Bronstein of our world. The point here in universe is the specificity of his name. Of course, even if Goldstein were a completely fabricated character within the party history, he would still need a name, or title at least, like Big Brother. However, given we know of his connection to real-world Bronstein, and that he too was an individual maligned and despised by Stalin and other Bolshevik leaders.
Okay, so here I cite page 135 of my latest book. In 1917, a Jewish Ukrainian, probably a Sabbatean named Lev Davidovich Bronstein, better known later to the world as Leon Trotsky, became one of the key figures in the establishment of the infamous Soviet Union. And then I forward to where I state the fact that, of course, there was the involvement of Kuhn Loeb and Co. of New York, the investment bank, and the legendary German-born Jewish-American banker Jacob Henry Schiff, who died in 1920 and would allegedly help Trotsky and his comrades break through the British blockade with a check by Max Warburg of Hamburg. The Warburg family was also connected to this important investment bank. They were all related, one with the other. In fact, if you even go here on their Wikipedia page, you can see that aside from other information, it says, in the firm early years, intermarriage among the German Jewish elite was common. because that German Jewish elite was, of course, Sabbatean Frankist. Consequently, the partners of Kuhn Loeb were closely related by blood and marriage to the partners of J.W. Seringan, Spey & Co., Goldman Sachs & Co., Lehman Brothers. In fact, then it will eventually merge into Lehman Brothers, and we know what happened in 2008. I repeat, Rockefeller, the Rockefeller family also have a very important role in all this because it was their investment bank in a critical moment of their history. But if we want to get to the new Monroe doctrine, the Monroe doctrine of the past becoming Donald Trump doctrine, Trump is simply obeying to the New World Order, abandoning the old order of Bretton Woods of the United Nations. We are seeing also in the last couple of days what Trump is doing in regards to detaching itself from a variety of organizations that are part of that milieu. So in a book called Thy Will Be Done, Gerald Corby with Sharon Dennett, it actually gives us an idea of the conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller, and evangelism in the age of oil. Because what is happening in Venezuela is actually something that Nelson Rockefeller, a very important figure in the development of this new world order, had materialized after the 1920s, 1930s onwards, and until Chavez took control, there was an absolute certainty that the Venezuelan connection will be always a reliable source of oil. And this, of course, this book explains how Nelson Rockefeller was connected also with MK Ultra. It was connected with psychological operations. In fact, I think it was Eisenhower who nominated him when he was very young in government, in charge of also, amongst other things, psychological operations. Let me show you some pics of interest that here you have, for example, Nelson Rockefeller stands by his family, the wing of the New York Metropolitan Museum donated by his family. But also there is his role is very important in all the post-World War II creation of this new world order. And of course we have his friend Henry Kissinger. Let's not forget that Nelson Rockefeller was also connected to what they called the Rockefeller Republicans. His role in politics in America was very influential. So aside from being a part of this important family, who, as I've shown you, was working hand in hand with the Sabbatean Frankists, because Paul Warburg, Felix Warburg, Mortimer Schiff, Benjamin Buntenweiser, Levi Strauss, Sigmund Warburg, founder also of S.G. Warburg, an important investment bank in London, they were all interconnected with the investment house, with John D. Rockefeller. They were the investment house of John D. Rockefeller. And I'm not stating anything conspirational here, but just realistic. You can read it. Kuhn, Loeb & Co. has acted as the leading investment house for John D. Rockefeller through the guidance of his investment banker, Frederick T. Gates. Now, Standard Oil, of course, very interested in Caracas and in what was happening when they first found oil there in Venezuela. So let me give you a resume of what happened in the past, because now, of course, we have the CIA that has taken control of Venezuela by simply leaving the loyalists of Chavez there in place to lead Venezuela without any significant change. Now, it's very important, though, to explain how I am connecting all this to 1984 and to a situation where the world will be eventually divided in three. Because, first of all, I explained the fictional world of 1984 is in reality a playbook.
In Oceania, of course, the reigning ideology is INSOC, while in Eurasia it is known as Neo-Bolshevism. Third and finally, a similar party rules in East Asia under the philosophy of death worship, or more accurately, the ideology of obliteration of the South. Though named differently, however, the essential structure of each is practically indistinguishable. Most of the people within these superstates are proles or non-party members, essentially the crushed and poverty-riven masses who labour and breed to sustain the economic life of each territory. In each, there is a party equivalent, and extrapolating from the book, in which we know the party is divided into an inner and outer party, we can surmise a similar structure exists in both Eurasia and East Asia. Around 13% of the population of Oceania are outer party members, effectively the skilled or civil servant class, who execute the policies of the directing brains of the state, collectively known as the inner party, comprising just 2% of the population. At the apex of each society and state sits Big Brother or his equivalent. Around each figurehead, a cult of personality is maintained, the book explaining that, quote, Big Brother's function is to act as a focusing point for love, fear, and reverence, emotions which are more easily felt towards an individual than towards an organization. While on the surface this lack of ideological difference may indicate a peaceful coexistence, the truth is anything but. Warfare within the 1984 universe has become continuous and limited. Since each superstate operates under a similar ideological structure, each requires a permanent state of conflict to maintain its party's hegemony indefinitely. An endless state of limited warfare maintains the strict hierarchical structure of each society, while also wasting vast resources and manpower that would otherwise be channeled into areas that improve the general well-being for their populations. Like mutually supporting legs of a tripod, even if desired, each superstate cannot really be conquered even by a combination of the other two. Oceania's core territories are protected by the vast Atlantic Pacific Oceans, while the sheer enormity of the Eurasian landmass makes conquest unlikely. East Asia too is insulated from such a fate by the sheer size and industriousness of its population. By the year 1984 in the novel, warfare between each superstate has been largely limited to smaller numbers of professional troops in disputed areas, as represented by rough quadrilateral area, its corners at Tangier, Brazzaville, Darwin, and Hong Kong. Though particular areas within the disputed zone do have valuable resources and vast numbers of effective slaves that periodically change hands between the powers, in truth, each superstate is effectively self-sufficient already. In keeping with the principle of doublethink, the leaders of each state both understand and suppress their understanding that the war is unwinnable, or more accurately, the war is not meant to be won, but maintained to create the war atmosphere.
The war atmosphere that is necessary. That's it. This emerging world order, yes, it's developing in the light of the old one, but the future is going to be definitely fueled with more wars, not less wars, because this eternal war is what really keeps the order in 1984. So here we have a moment of great significance. In the month of December, the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Venezuela gave a speech, the end of the year speech. If you listen and you understand what he says, he is basically announcing the transformation of Venezuela, not only of his own Masonic obedience, but of the whole of the society of Venezuela. Here we have, of course, the headquarters of the Grand Lodge of Venezuela and his Grand Master, who is a very influential guy.
La gloria del gran arquitecto del universo, salud, fuerza y unión. Queridos hermanos, en este 16 de diciembre quiero expresar mis más sinceras felicitaciones a todos aquellos que han participado en los procesos de elecciones e instalaciones en nuestras logias. A los venerables maestros electos y reelectos, así como a todas las dignidades y oficiales de las logias jurisdiccionadas. Les agradezco por su compromiso y dedicación al trabajo masónico. Su esfuerzo es el reflejo de una masonería que avanza, que crece y que se adapta a los nuevos tiempos que
se adapta a los nuevos tiempos que estamos viviendo. So a form of Freemasonry that is adapting to the time we are living. Let's not forget that Simon Bolivar, one of the most important figures in Venezuelan history, was also a very important Freemason. And the history of, you have, of course, the Gran Loggia della Repubblica de Venezuela, which is represented by this individual, the Grand Lodge of the Republic of Venezuela, recognized by the majority of Freemasons in Latin America, member of the Inter-American Masonic Confederation. And then you have, of course, some irregular obediences, which have been created a little bit like in Italy, moments of turmoil. And that's where we have, of course, the Grand Lodge of the United States of Venezuela. Then you have the Grand Lodge of the East, the Sovereign Grand Lodge of Craft of Venezuela. There is the existence of dissident groups. And one thing that most of you might not know is that the Freemasonry in Venezuela has protected in different times in recent history two key figures of Italian Freemasonry and of the Mafia. I'm talking about Licio Gelli from the P2 Lodge, the worshipper master of the P2 Lodge, who was in Venezuela until 1987 when he gave himself up to the Swiss authorities, who later on sent him to Italy. He was at the time, of course, a guy officially wanted by the international police. Licio Gelli, the worshipper master, was protected by Venezuelan Freemasonry. And I'm not just stating that out of thin air. Even in this article, which was published immediately after his death by Quotidiano Nazionale, they specifically talked about the fact that Licio Gelli, after the names of the P2 part of the names, only 962 out of 2,500 in reality, had been discovered and made public. But as you can see here, it says he found refuge in South America, where he stayed a long time between Venezuela and Argentina. Then there is another figure of great importance who took Venezuela as his refuge because of the brilliant connections that Venezuelan Freemasonry has. The guy I'm talking about is Matteo Messina Denaro. We are talking about the godfather, the late godfather of Cosa Nostra, and you can see this article that talks about Matteo Messina Denaro and the Freemasons who protected him. Matteo Messina Denaro, I repeat, was the godfather of Cosa Nostra. He will be eventually arrested 3 years ago, only when he was almost at the last stage of his cancer, and so he was about to die. So that's when he gave himself up, basically, but he was protected by Freemasonry in Italy and internationally. And in fact, here, if you check out, it says traces of the head of the mafia were found from Sicily to Venezuela, and also England and Spain. Venezuela. Matteo Messina Denaro, like I said, was the head of Cosa Nostra. I mean, you're talking about the mythical godfather, and he was the godfather, and he was also protected by Freemasons in Venezuela. This is Matteo Messina Denaro. This is an old pic of Matteo Messina Denaro, who for decades was on the wanted list of the police internationally. It says here, the Italian boss from Castelvetrano. He was considered to be one of the leaders of the Cosa Nostra after the arrest of Bernardo Provenzano and Salvatore Lo Piccolo. And Messina Denaro became a fugitive on the most wanted list of the Italian Ministry of Interior in 1993. And like I said, amongst other places, he was also in Venezuela. CIA connected, of course, because the CIA works hand in hand with Cosa Nostra since the times of Lucky Luciano, when Lucky Luciano got the United States, America, to invade starting from Sicily. Now, let me read some citations from Henry Kissinger in regards to the United States and how they've been acting for a long time. In this book, Henry Kissinger states that Venezuela is a territory of the United States, basically is under the control of the United States, and that the United States always saw their neighbors as areas of influence in this hemisphere. And it says here that for Thomas Jefferson, America was not only a great power in the making, but an empire for liberty, an ever-expanding force acting on behalf of all humanity to vindicate principle of good governance. As Jefferson wrote during his presidency, quoting Thomas Jefferson, "We feel that we are acting under obligation not confined to the limits of our own society. It is impossible not to be sensible that we are acting for all mankind, that circumstances denied to others but indulged to us have imposed on us the duty of proving that what is the degree of freedom and self-government in which a society may venture to live its individual members." So at that point, even before the Monroe Doctrine came around, there was always the perception that wherever the United States was bringing its influence, it was an extension of its values. And its values, of course, as Kissinger explains, were the values also partly imported with the various Christian sectarian realities, like the Puritans, for example. No? Now, in regards to China, Asia and the international order in China, Kissinger played a key role with his strategy of mutual deterrence based on the nuclear arsenal, the growing nuclear arsenal of both the United States and the Soviet Union. And that brought the New World Order after the Second World War, because China didn't have a nuclear arsenal. And for that reason, Taiwan stayed independent. Now, things have changed. And China, of course, has a different take on things that even Kissinger outlined already in this book, that basically in the sinocentric vision of things, the view of Chinese, the emperor of China had already in the old days of the empire, China saw itself as being the owner of earth, of everything under heaven. So it was like China formed the central civilized part, the middle kingdom, inspiring and uplifting the rest of humanity. So they already saw themselves as the guys who ruled this planet. Now, you have also in this book a whole thing about the tradition of Iranian statecraft, which is quite interesting in relation to what is happening nowadays. We have seen, of course, the message that was sent by Pahlavi, who said now is to occupy, is not only to protest, but to conquer all the centers of power, all the cities, because we are talking now openly of a regime change, of course, that is about to happen there in Iran. And here it talks quite a lot about the roughly 2,500 years. There is really a lot of history in also the Pahlavi dynasty, of course, but also in the dynasties that occurred before. In my book here, Confessions of an Illuminati, I explained how this new world order was transforming itself. And like I said, going towards a one world government, but this doesn't happen in a day. First, there is a division between the three major players. So it's not about saying Trump is evil or is not evil. Trump is simply doing what the people behind the scenes are dictating him to do. He is being compromised. If he has only released 1% of Epstein files, there must be some degree of compromise that we are not yet capable of fully grasping. And of course, in all this, there is, in this emerging world order, there is a war against religion, a war against God, and the creation of a one world religion that is already coming together. We see also the Vatican since 2018 with their alliance with China. I've talked about it in volume 12 of my Confessions. There's a whole chapter about the Jesuits in China, because the Jesuits have always been the ones behind the expansion of China and of their influence. If you think about it, Nixon, Kissinger, George Bush could have just ignored China in the 70s. Their fear was that China will, at that point, do what they're doing now, an alliance with Russia, and create a Sino-Russian world order. Well, now their fears are materializing, and China is not really showing us here in America to be our friends or to be thankful for what we have done for them, introducing them to the world of capital, let's say. In the meantime, let's go back to the three supercontinental states that are shaping up in the vision of George Orwell.
Maintain each of these self-contained totalitarian societies, despite inherently understanding that the war must be maintained, continuous, and so not won. Even if this were somehow possible, the members of the inner party are yet the most fanatical members of Oceanian society in their fervent belief that world conquest and the destruction of both opposing superstates is an inevitability. The war thus shifts continuously and has done so for the past 2 decades up to Winston's time, Oceania allying with either Eurasia or East Asia against the other, waging endless, limited war in the disputed zone, while likely launching rockets into its own territory, or at least allowing such attacks to create the siege mentality conducive to their totalitarian hierarchical societies, and thus affect a maintenance of their power for the sake of exercising that power. So there we have it, the geopolitical map of Orwell's 1984. The 3 major powers are Oceania, Eurasia and East Asia, with the territory of the disputed zone essentially a necessary and endless crucible of warfare, particular parts changing masters every now and then. If you enjoyed this video, then consider hitting that like button.
And we thank, of course, 1984 Lore for this excellent description. We go back to my latest article, The Truth on the New World Order, Trump and the 2026 Birth of the Supercontinental States, because that's where we are heading towards global transformation, and the truth needs to be told. The old world order, the liberal world order that includes the United Nations, the North Atlantic Treaty, NATO, and of course the Bretton Woods system, including the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, they are declining in front of our eyes. They are becoming increasingly irrelevant because we have something new that is emerging. The recent attack on Venezuela and the capture of President Nicolas Maduro shows that Trump's United States are turning away from the established rule-based international order, because that's what is happening. The birth of the continental superstates, that the continental supranationalism is the future for a humanity that is embracing a new form of technology, cyber Satan, the artificial intelligence and robotics that will be dominating soon, and millions of people will lose their jobs because of robotics and AI. Those millions of people will be increasingly controlled by the big brother that, of course, when it comes to George Orwell 1984, is still a big brother with modest means, because now when we have Palantir, when we have facial recognition, AI, and all sorts of monstrosities to control you, it's a very different situation. In volume 7 of my confession, I wrote, the great resetter Henry Kissinger, Klaus Schwab's mentor, a member of the Bohemian Club, one of the main architects of the New World Order, diplomat and geopolitical consultant, very close to the Vatican, as well as the Sabbatians, who serve as United States Secretary of State and National Security Advisor under the presidential administration of Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, and a key figure in opening China to the rest of the world. Unfortunately, I added in my book. You see, it's really about understanding how the future of mankind is developing, and it's not a future where we'll have small sovereign states. That is a thing of the past. It's about everything is for grabs for the three great powers that are emerging in this world order. Emerging, of course, in the light of the old one. And like I stated earlier, one of the key figures is also the antagonist, Emmanuel Goldstein.
It's at least likely that Orwell intended him as a real individual, at least earlier on in the history of the world. I think we can infer Goldstein's story as likely true, given that we know about Ingsoc philosophy on power, funnily enough outlined in Goldstein's book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Though the book is eventually revealed by O'Brien as a fabrication of the Thought Police, partially written by himself, O'Brien, for what it's worth, does admit that the contents are true as description, even if its program for the ultimate destruction of the party is nonsense. In the book, it's explained that since the new ruling class, or high, knew exactly why they had seized power, that is, for the sake of that power, the high or inner party understood they must carefully structure society in such a way as to retain their power indefinitely. Part of their strategy for achieving this was realizing that such absolute power must be collective. Groups such as the Catholic Church, for example, that are adoptive and collective, can endure for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years, whereas systems in which power is heavily concentrated into a handful of individuals will likely fall sooner to revolution, the wheel of history turning once again.
The wheel of history is turning once again. Just check out this article, for example. Germany's globalist president says US destroying world order, because we are destroying the old world order, and we are embracing something new. We don't necessarily think that this new realization, this new product would be better than the old world order. Actually, with the technology that this new world order has at its disposal, it's probably going to be even worse. People don't know that also there is a rich history of the Jews in Venezuela. There were records of groups of Marranos, Spanish and Portuguese descendants, who had been baptized to the Catholic faith, but in particular, the Marranos were accused of, because the Marranos were not the conversos, they were not the genuine converts. They were still practicing in secret Judaism, a little bit like what happened with the Shabbatai Zevi later on, and the Sabbatians who became the Domé. Now, since Hugo Chavez took power in 1999, there was a lot of tension between the government and the Jewish population. But then this tension kind of faded out with Maduro. Maduro, who is, people might not know that, Maduro is a Sephardic Jew, is a Sabbatian Frankist. Is a Sabbatian Frankist of the worst kind. Maduro is the typical Sabbatian Frankist who converted to the Catholic faith. We can also write Sephardic Jewish origins. Let me show you, so you can see. So Maduro is a Sabbatian Frankist. It's not simply cited the Sephardic Jewish roots, but his own statements in the public leave his Jewish status unconfirmed, because as old Sabbatian Frankist, he was still very critical of the Jews. You see, the grandparents were Jews from a Sephardic background who later became Catholic in Venezuela. That is a typical Sabbatian Frankist mentality. Welcome to the Leo Zagami Show. I see there is a lot of people who are tuning in. Please share this video, put like if you enjoyed it, and support us with the donations and also with the purchase of my books. Like I said, the motto of the $1 bill is Novo Ordo Secularum. And this motto is very important because this dollar bill was designed by Freemasons and influenced by Masonic symbolism. And it's very important to listen to this passage cited here on a book called Ancient Egypt and Islamic Destiny by Mustafa al-Amin. He cites actually the secret teachings of all ages of Manly Piol, stating, if anyone doubts, so this is Manly Piol, the presence of Masonic and occult influence at the time of the Great Seal was designed, it should give due consideration to the comments of Professor Charles Eliot Norwood of Harvard, who wrote concerning the unfinished pyramid and the all-seeing eye which adorned the reverse of the seal, not only were many of the founders of the United States government Mason, but they received aid from a secret and august body existing in Europe, which helped them to establish this country for a peculiar and particular purpose known only to the initiated few. And that purpose is described, of course, also in volume 1 of my Confessions. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I've also showed you briefly the Grand Master of Venezuelan Freemasonry.
Más que nunca es esencial reconocer la importancia de premiar el trabajo bien realizado. En un contexto donde la masonería venezolana se encuentra en un proceso de evolución y progreso.
So they are meeting for evolution and progress. His name is José Gregorio Sardelli Bravo, and he is the present Grand Master of Venezuelan Freemasonry, who at the end of last year gave this end of the year speech, which of course, if we actually see it today, we understand was transmitting a message also to those who knew that Maduro was on his way out.
Es fundamental que celebremos los logros alcanzados y el camino que hemos recorrido juntos. Hemos logrado construir un espacio donde la democracia plena reina.
So we are constructing a space where the democracy will fully reign.
Donde el respeto al pensamiento individual y colectivo de nuestras logias y hermanos se han convertido en un pilar fundamental. Es un hecho notorio que hemos dejado atrás prácticas que no favorecían nuestro desarrollo como gran familia masónica.
So he is, of course, pushing his message of being a great Masonic family, of respecting the universality of Freemasonry, the fraternity, liberty, and equality for all message that we got in the French Revolution, Fraternité, Liberté, and Égalité. And what we are viewing was definitely a message that can be read now in the light of Maduro kidnapping as almost a warning and a message to all the various Freemasons that something was about to happen, that there was a big turning point ahead.
La imposición ha sido sustituida por un modelo donde las decisiones se toman por mayoría en todas las instancias.
We will now talk about the fact that his Masonic structure is living in harmony and that they are against any form of totalitarianism.
Radica en la claridad con que exponemos nuestros problemas y en la existencia de medios para resolverlos. No se trata del silencio, sino de la capacidad de dialogar, de escuchar y de...
So this capacity of dialoguing, of listening, of finding solutions. Machado, of course, found an easy terrain for her Nobel Peace Prize candidacy, and she eventually got it because the Freemasons in Norway, who are the ones in charge of the Nobel Peace Prize, of course, were also listening to the suggestions of the Venezuelan Freemasons. I mean, the Grand Lodge of Venezuela Freemasonry today has a lot of lodges and a lot of members. Let me show you exactly how many members. It claims 121 lodges as of 2006. and 2006 is a long time ago, so maybe they have even more. The Cronologia della Repubblica de Venezuela was founded in 1824.
Encontrar soluciones en conjunto. En este sentido, hoy tenemos la oportunidad de enfrentar nuestros desafíos sin recurrir a imposiciones ni autoritarismo.
See, this was the space dedicated to Maduro, the authoritarian leader. This was obviously a criticism. It wasn't an open criticism, but it was positioned in a very diplomatic way so that Maduro will not retaliate when this speech was given at the end of December.
Necesarios. Este es el momento de seguir adelante, de fortalecer nuestros lazos, de seguir construyendo una masonería que refleje.
So this is the moment we have to build something new, a Masonry, a Freemasonry that reflects the value,
los valores de la libertad, la
values of liberty,
la igualdad y la fraternidad. La evolución que estamos viviendo es un testimonio.
That the evolution that we are living, says the Grand Master of Venezuelan Freemasonry,
Del trabajo arduo de cada uno de
it's the testimony of our hard work.
ustedes. Y es mi deseo que sigamos avanzando en esta senda de progreso institucional.
So they are advancing. Let's not forget that a few years ago, after the 2018 election, there was actually a Freemason that for a time, Juan Guaido, attempted to be the president at interim, and he was recognized by a number of foreign states. This is Guaido, after he was initiated. And this guy was actually guested the other night by Cuomo on News Nation, and they asked him about what was going on, and he, of course, explained that Maduro forced him into an exile, and he's now living in Florida. So definitely, if things are changing now, Juan Guaido might have a new role, because this document from the Gran Logia supports him. See, Gran Logia Central della Nueva York might not be a regular form of Freemasonry from what I heard, but maybe it is. The lodge Benjamin Franklin number 13 gave its full support to this gentleman in Caracas on the 23rd of January 2019. See, here we have Jorge de las Salas, 31st degree, and signed also by the Sovereign Grand Commander Alberto Berisbezia. Now, I showed you a few things that no other show has shown you, so I hope you will continue to support us. I want to leave you with something that we might discuss maybe in a future episode. Turning Point USA, guys. Turning Point USA. Unfortunately, now, with the direct involvement of former Colonel Paul E. Valley, who was the co-author of From Psyop to Mind War with Michael Aquino. I talked about him in volume 11 of my Confessions. Well, Paul Valley is now a council member of Turning Point USA. That's not so good, guys. Actually, it's very bad. Keep on supporting us. I see you next week. And of course, if you want to cook yourself a great dish, a great meal, I always say go to my wife's book, Zagami Family Cookbook, Authentic Italian Cooking by Christy Zagami. This is a great book filled with the recipes. Christy's, of course, always very creative in the kitchen. She's thanking me on the chat. Hello, amore. And we will see you next week. Sooner or later, I will manage to get Christy back here in front of you. No worries. Speak to you soon.